Philip Adler's body was recovered on May 14, 2017. He was buried under 40 tons of collapsed ice at 6,500 meters on Annapurna. His right hand was still gripping his trekking pole. His left hand was reaching upward. The recovery team said it looked like he was trying to claw his way out. He wasn't. The ice had crushed his chest cavity on impact. He was dead before he could move. He was 43 years old. He left behind a wife, a 7-year-old son, and a replacement Sherpa guide who died 3 meters away from him. That guide was 24. Here's what makes this story different from every other climbing death you've heard about. Philip Adler had a veteran Sherpa, one of the best on Annapurna, a man named Mingma Dorje who had summited the mountain 3 times. Mingma told Philip to abort. He said the Saraks above Camp 3 were unstable. He said the route was a death trap. He said if they pushed higher, people would die. Philip didn't just ignore him. He called the expedition operator and demanded Mingma be removed from his team. Replaced. Fired. And the expedition operator, a company called Summit Horizon Expeditions, agreed. They pulled Mingma off the mountain and sent up a 24-year-old named Lakpa Tamang, who had never climbed above 7,000 meters in his life. Lakpa had been working as a kitchen helper at base camp. 3 days later, Lakpa was dead. Philip was dead. And Mingma Dorje was standing at base camp listening to the radio calls, knowing exactly what had happened. Because he'd told them. He'd told all of them. But this isn't a simple story about a rich man ignoring a warning. Everyone who covered this tragedy made it sound that way. Arrogant millionaire. Wise Sherpa. Predictable death. It's clean, it's satisfying, and it's incomplete. Because Philip Adler didn't make this decision alone. 3 separate people had the power to stop what happened. Philip was one of them. The expedition operator, a man named Rajesh Kundel, was the second. And the third? The third was someone nobody ever talked about. Someone whose silence cost 2 lives. Someone who is still working in the climbing industry today. By the time you understand what all 3 of them did, you'll realize this wasn't a story about arrogance. It was a story about leverage. About money. About what happens when a client has more power than the people keeping him alive. And I need to tell you something about Philip Adler right now. Not later. Right now. Because this changes everything. Philip Adler wasn't some clueless tourist who bought his way onto a mountain. He had 12 years of climbing experience. He'd summited Cho Oyu. He'd summited Manaslu. He'd attempted Dhaulagiri and turned back at 700-800 meters because conditions deteriorated. He turned back. He made the safe call. The man who died on Annapurna had a history of making good decisions on mountains. So what changed? What turned a cautious, experienced climber into someone who fired his Sherpa and marched into a Sarak collapse zone with an unqualified replacement? The answer is in an email sent on April 9, 2017, 12 days before Philip arrived at Annapurna Base Camp. That email has never been published in full. Parts of it leaked during the lawsuit Philip's wife filed against Summit Horizon Expeditions. But the full text reveals something that reframes this entire tragedy. Philip didn't fire Mingma because he thought Mingma was wrong. He fired Mingma because someone told him Mingma was trying to sabotage his expedition. Someone lied to Philip Adler. And that lie got 2 people killed. Now, before we go any further, you need to understand who these 3 men were. Philip, Mingma, Lakpa, because 2 of them are dead. One of them carries the weight of both deaths. And none of them deserved what happened on that mountain. Philip Adler was a hedge fund manager from Greenwich, Connecticut. He managed over $400 million in assets. He drove a Tesla. He lived in a 5-bedroom house with a view of Long Island Sound. He had a personal trainer, a nutritionist, and a climbing coach he'd worked with for 6 years. He was methodical. He was disciplined. He planned every expedition for a minimum of 18 months. His wife, Caroline, described him as obsessive about preparation. His climbing coach said Philip was the most cautious client he'd ever trained. None of that fits the narrative you've been told. Mingma Dorje was from Solukhumbu, Nepal. He was 38 years old. He had been guiding on 8,000-meter peaks for 14 years. He'd summited Annapurna 3 times, Everest twice, Dhaulagiri once. He had a reputation among expedition operators as difficult, not because he was bad at his job, because he was too good at it. Mingma refused to take clients through conditions he considered dangerous. He had pulled clients off mountains mid-expedition 4 times in his career. Every single time he was right. Every single time the conditions he warned about materialized. And every single time the expedition operator lost money. This matters. Remember this. Lakpa Tamang was 24. He was from Rasua district. He had worked as a porter since he was 19. He'd been hired by Summit Horizon as a kitchen assistant for the 2017 Annapurna spring season. His highest altitude experience was Camp 2 on Manaslu, 400 meters, as a load carrier. He had never guided a client. He had never been responsible for anyone's safety above base camp. He was being paid $1,200 for the entire season as kitchen staff. When they asked him to replace Mingma and guide Philip to Camp 3, they offered him $3,000. That was more money than Lakaba had earned in the previous 2 years combined. He said yes. He didn't know what Saraks were. He didn't know the route above Camp 2. He didn't have the experience to assess whether the ice formations were stable. He went up the mountain with a man whose life depended on his judgment, and he had no judgment to give. 2 of these 3 men are dead. The third, Mingma, still wakes up at night hearing the radio calls from Camp 3. Still wonders if he could have done more. Still carries the guilt of surviving when the 2 men who replaced him did not. He was right about everything. It didn't save anyone. Here's what this documentary will cover that nothing else has. The email that changed Philip's mind about Mingma. The specific conversation between Rajesh Kundel and Philip at base camp on April 25th. The 3-minute radio call from Lakpa at 400 meters that nobody responded to. The camera footage recovered from Philip's GoPro. The lawsuit documents that revealed Summit Horizon had been warned about the Sarak instability 6 days before Philip's summit push. The expedition operator's response to that warning, and the identity of the third person, the one nobody talks about, who could have stopped everything and chose not to. This is not the story you think you know. This is the full story. Every decision, every lie, every body left on the ice. And it starts with a man named Philip Adler, sitting in his home office in Greenwich, Connecticut, opening an email that would eventually kill him. He didn't know that. He read it, believed it, and made a phone call. That phone call set everything in motion, because the email told him his Sherpa was planning to sabotage his summit bid. It told him Mingma had a history of aborting expeditions to protect his own reputation. It told him Mingma was more concerned about his track record than Philip's success. None of that was true. But Philip believed every word, because the email came from someone he trusted, someone inside the climbing industry, someone who had a financial reason to want Mingma off that mountain. To understand why Philip believed it, and why that belief killed him, you need to understand what happened in the 18 months before he ever set foot on Annapurna. Because the man who arrived at base camp in April 2017 was not the same man who had turned back safely on Dhaulagiri 2 years earlier. Something had shifted, something had broken, and that break, more than any Sarak, more than any ignored warning, was the real beginning of the end. Chapter 2. 3 Men, 3 Mountains. Philip Adler didn't start climbing for the reasons you'd expect from a hedge fund manager worth $40 million. He started because his older brother died. Thomas Adler was 41 when a brain aneurysm killed him at his desk in 2008. No warning signs. No family history. Thomas was eating a sandwich, reviewing quarterly reports, and then he was on the floor, dead, before the paramedics arrived. Philip was 34. He and Thomas had been close, not in the way brothers say they're close at cocktail parties, but genuinely close. They talked every day. They ran together on weekends. Thomas was the one person Philip trusted completely. After Thomas died, Philip stopped sleeping. He lost 20 pounds in 2 months. His wife Caroline said he would sit in his home office at 3 in the morning, staring at nothing. He wasn't grieving the way people expected. He wasn't crying. He wasn't talking about it. He was doing something worse. He was calculating. Philip told his therapist. This came out during the lawsuit depositions. That Thomas's death proved something he'd always feared, that life was random, that you could do everything right and still die at your desk eating a turkey sandwich. That control was an illusion. Climbing gave him the opposite feeling. On a mountain, the danger was visible. You could assess it, measure it, prepare for it. The risk wasn't random, it was calculated. Philip told Carolyn that climbing was the only place where he felt like his survival was in his own hands. That's an ironic thing to say about mountaineering, where objective dangers like avalanches and Sarak collapses are, by definition, outside your control. But Philip didn't see it that way. He saw preparation as armor. He believed that if you trained hard enough, planned carefully enough, hired the right people, you could eliminate the randomness. You could beat the odds. That belief system worked for 9 years. He summited Cho Oyu in 2011. Clean expedition. No problems. He summited Manaslu in 2013. Difficult weather, but he made every right call. He attempted Dhaulagiri in 2015 and turned back at 700-800 meters when his guide said conditions were deteriorating. He didn't argue. He didn't push. He descended. His guide later said Philip was the easiest client he'd ever worked with. Respectful, disciplined, willing to listen. So what happened between Dhaulagiri in 2015 and Annapurna in 2017? 2 things happened, and both of them broke something inside Philip Adler. The first was financial. In August 2016, Philip's hedge fund lost $38 million in a single quarter. Bad bets on energy futures. It wasn't catastrophic. The fund still managed over $400 million. But it was public. Financial media covered it. Competitors talked about it. For the first time in his career, Philip Adler was seen as someone who had made a mistake. For a man who built his identity on preparation and control, that was devastating. Caroline said he became obsessed with his next major success. Not just in finance, in everything. He needed to prove to himself, to everyone watching, that he was still the man who didn't make mistakes. The second thing was social. Philip had started posting about his climbs on Instagram in 2014. By 2016, he had 47,000 followers. Not massive, but enough that people recognized him at industry events. Enough that sponsors had reached out. Enough that Philip's identity had shifted from hedge fund manager who climbs to, quote, climber who also runs a hedge fund. He'd done 2 podcast interviews about risk management, using climbing as a metaphor. He'd been profiled in a climbing magazine. The article called him the Calculated Climber. Philip loved that title. He had it framed. Annapurna was supposed to be his masterpiece. The 10th highest mountain in the world. One of the most dangerous. A fatality rate that dwarfed Everest's. Philip had been planning it for 18 months. He'd hired the best operator he could find, Summit Horizon Expeditions, based on a recommendation from another climber. He'd specifically requested Mingma Dorje as his personal Sherpa guide. He'd read about Mingma's track record. 3 Annapurna summits. Impeccable safety record. Philip chose Mingma because Mingma was the safest option available, remember that. Philip chose Mingma for his safety record. The same safety record he would later use as a reason to fire him. Now, Mingma Dorje. You need to understand this man, because every account of this tragedy treats him like a prop. The wise Sherpa who warned the arrogant Westerner. That's not who Mingma was. Mingma was a complicated, stubborn, proud professional who had spent 14 years watching foreign climbers ignore the mountain's warnings, and he was tired of it. Mingma grew up in Namche Bazaar. His father was a porter. His uncle was one of the first Sherpa guides on Everest's commercial expeditions in the early 1990s. Mingma started carrying loads at 16. By 20, he was a full climbing Sherpa. By 24, he'd summited Everest for the first time. He didn't celebrate. He called his wife Dawa from Camp 2 on the descent and said, "I'm coming home." That was it. Mingma's reputation in the climbing industry was split. Among other Sherpas, he was respected absolutely. They called him the Wall, because when Mingma said no, nothing moved him. Among expedition operators, he was considered a liability. Not because he was incompetent. The opposite. Because he refused to let operators push clients through dangerous conditions. He'd aborted 4 expeditions mid-climb. Each time, he was right. Each time, the conditions he warned about killed or injured climbers on other teams who pushed through. And each time, the expedition operator lost the client's fee, lost their reputation for summit success rates, and blamed Mingma. Summit Horizon expeditions had hired Mingma reluctantly. They needed his Annapurna experience. He was one of only a handful of Sherpas with 3 summits on that mountain. But Rajesh Kandel, Summit Horizon's founder, had been warned by 2 other operators that Mingma was difficult, that he would shut down an expedition over nothing, that he prioritized his own judgment over client satisfaction. Rajesh hired him anyway. Philip had specifically requested him. Philip was paying $85,000 for the expedition. You don't say no to $85,000. And then there was Lakpa Tamang. Lakpa was the youngest of 5 children. His father was a subsistence farmer in Rasua district. The family earned less than $2,000 a year. Lakpa had dropped out of school at 15 to work as a porter. He was strong, quiet, and eager to please. Everyone at base camp liked him. He made tea before anyone asked. He carried loads without complaining. He smiled constantly. The other Sherpas called him Little Brother. Lakpa wanted to become a climbing Sherpa. It was his only path to a better life. Climbing Sherpas earned 10 to 20 times what porters and kitchen staff made. But to become a climbing Sherpa, you needed experience above 7,000 meters. You needed certifications. You needed an expedition operator willing to invest in your training. Lakpa had none of these things. His highest point was Camp 2 on Manaslu as a load carrier. He'd never roped up with a client. He'd never assessed a route for danger. He'd never made a life-or-death decision above base camp. When Summit Horizon asked him to replace Mingma and guide Philip to Camp 3, Lakpa called his mother. He told her he'd been offered $3,000. His mother started crying. That was more money than the family had seen in 2 years. She told him to be careful. He said he would be. He didn't tell her he'd never done anything like this before. He didn't tell her he didn't know the route. He didn't tell her he was scared. Lakpa Tamang put on Mingma's climbing harness. Literally Mingma's harness, because Lakpa didn't have one rated for high altitude, and started up the mountain with Philip Adler on April 27, 2017. He was 24 years old. He had been a kitchen helper 6 days earlier. He would be dead in 72 hours. If you're angry right now, good. Hold on to that anger. Because what you're about to learn is that Lakpa's death was the most preventable death in modern Himalayan climbing history. Every single person in the chain of command knew he wasn't qualified. Every single one of them let him go anyway. And the reason they let him go will make you angrier than anything Philip Adler ever did. Philip was the client. He was arrogant. He was wrong. But he was the one person in this story who didn't know what he didn't know. Everyone else did. And they sent Lakpa up anyway. Before we get to the mountain, before the ice and the radio calls and the silence, you need to understand one more thing. The relationship between Philip and Mingma before it broke. Because for the first 5 days at base camp, they got along. Mingma respected Philip's preparation. Philip respected Mingma's experience. They ate meals together. Philip showed Mingma photos of his son, Oliver. Mingma showed Philip photos of his daughters. They were, by all accounts, a good team. Then the email arrived, and everything changed. Chapter 3, The Email That Killed 2 Men, April 9, 2017. 12 days before Philip Adler arrived at Annapurna Base Camp. He was sitting in his home office in Greenwich when his phone buzzed. New email. The sender was someone Philip had met at a climbing conference in Kathmandu the previous year. A logistics coordinator named Dan Bahadur, who worked with multiple expedition operators, including Summit Horizon. Philip considered Dan a trusted contact. They'd exchanged emails about gear recommendations and permit logistics. Philip had no reason to doubt him. The email was 3 paragraphs long. It said this: Mingma Dorje had a pattern of aborting expeditions unnecessarily. He did it to protect his personal reputation. If a client failed to summit, Mingma could claim he'd made the safe call. But the real motivation was that Mingma had arrangements with certain expedition operators, where he received bonuses for steering clients toward repeat attempts. Abort the first expedition, recommend the client come back next season, collect a referral fee. The email said 2 other clients had complained about this exact pattern. The email said Philip should watch Mingma carefully. If Mingma recommended aborting, Philip should get a second opinion. None of it was true. Every single claim in that email was fabricated. Mingma had never received referral bonuses. His aborted expeditions were all justified, verified afterward by independent analysis. The two other clients who had complained didn't exist. The entire email was a lie. So why did Tan Bahadur send it? This is where the third person enters the story, the one nobody talks about. Tan Bahadur didn't write that email on his own. He wrote it because Rajesh Kandel, the founder of Summit Horizon Expeditions, asked him to. Rajesh had worked with Mingma twice before. Both times, Mingma had aborted expeditions that Rajesh believed should have continued. Both times, Rajesh lost significant revenue. Rajesh didn't want Mingma on the Annapurna expedition. But Philip had specifically requested him, so Rajesh devised a different strategy. He would let Mingma come. But he would plant seeds of doubt in Philip's mind before the expedition even started. That way, if Mingma recommended aborting, which Rajesh suspected he would, Philip would already be primed to distrust him. Rajesh asked Dan to send the email because Dan had a relationship with Philip. It would seem organic. Friendly advice from a contact, not a directive from the expedition operator. Dan sent the email. He was paid 50,000 Nepali rupees, roughly $470, for doing it. Dan later said he didn't think it would matter. He thought Philip would just keep it in the back of his mind. He didn't think anyone would die because of an email. Philip read the email on April 9th. He didn't respond to it. He didn't mention it to Caroline. He didn't bring it up with Rajesh. He filed it away mentally. And when he arrived at base camp on April 21st and shook Mingma's hand for the first time, he was already suspicious. Not hostile. Not aggressive. Just watching. Waiting for signs that Mingma might be playing the game Don had described. For the first 5 days, Philip found no signs. Mingma was professional, experienced, and straightforward. They acclimatized together. They discussed the route. Mingma walked Philip through the specific dangers of Annapurna's north face, the Sarak bands, the avalanche-prone slopes, the unpredictable weather windows. Philip listened carefully. He took notes. He asked good questions. Mingma later told an interviewer that Philip was one of the better prepared clients he'd worked with. Then came April 26th. This was the day everything fractured. At 6 a.m., Mingma received a weather report from base camp. It showed a narrow summit window opening on April 29th, 3 days out. But the report also showed something else. Thermal imaging data from a satellite feed indicated that the Sarak band between Camp 2 and Camp 3, at roughly 300 to 600 meters, was experiencing accelerated melt. The ice structures that climbers had to pass under were becoming unstable. The data suggested a high probability of Sarak collapse within the next 5 to 7 days. Not certain, but high. Mingma looked at the data. He consulted with 2 other Sherpas who had been monitoring the route. All 3 agreed. The Sarak band was dangerous. The safe call was to wait. Delay the summit push by at least a week. Let the ice stabilize or collapse on its own. Then reassess. Mingma told Philip at breakfast. He laid out the data. He explained what Saraks were and why they collapsed. He showed Philip the satellite imagery on his phone. He said his recommendation was to delay. Philip asked one question. One question that would determine whether he lived or died. Has Summit Horizon sent this data to their other clients? Mingma said he didn't know. Philip walked to the communications tent and radioed Rajesh at the operator's Kathmandu office. Rajesh told Philip that the data was inconclusive. He said other teams were still planning to push for the summit window on April 29th. He said Mingma had a history of being, quote, overly cautious. He used those exact words. Overly cautious. Philip asked Rajesh directly, "Do you think it's safe to go?" Rajesh said, "I think the window is good, but it's your decision." Philip went back to Mingma. He told Mingma what Rajesh had said. Mingma was furious. He said Rajesh was not on the mountain. Rajesh could not see what he could see. Mingma said the Saraks were visibly different from his previous 3 expeditions. The ice was cracking. He could hear it at night. He said if Philip went through that Sarak band on April 27th or 28th, he was gambling with his life. Philip heard everything Mingma said. And then Don's email surfaced in his mind. Mingma recommending abort. Just like the email predicted, Mingma citing his own experience as the reason. Just like the email described. Philip didn't dismiss Mingma outright. But the seed had been planted. He was now filtering Mingma's genuine warning through a lens of suspicion that had been deliberately manufactured by the man who was supposed to be managing the expedition safely. That afternoon, Philip made the call that killed him. He radioed Rajesh again. This time, he didn't ask about the weather. He said, "I want a different guide. Mingma is recommending we abort. I don't trust his judgment. Send me someone who wants to climb." Rajesh didn't argue. He didn't defend Mingma. He didn't explain the Sarak data. He said he would arrange a replacement by morning. When Mingma learned he was being replaced, he went to Philip's tent. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. 3 other climbers overheard it. Mingma said, "You are making a mistake that will kill you." Philip said, "You're the one who's been trying to kill this expedition from the start." Mingma asked what he meant. Philip said he had information about Mingma's history. Mingma asked what information. Philip wouldn't say. Mingma told Philip that whatever he'd heard was a lie. Philip said, "Everyone says that when they're caught." Mingma packed his gear. Before he left Camp 1 for base camp, he stopped at the communications tent and radioed Rajesh directly. He told Rajesh the Sarak band would collapse. He said whoever replaced him would not know the route, would not recognize the danger signs, would not be able to keep Philip alive above 6,300 meters. He told Rajesh that sending an unqualified guide was the same as murder. Rajesh's response, recorded in the radio log that was later entered as evidence in the lawsuit. "Thank you for your concern, Mingma. We will handle it from here." Mingma descended to base camp on the evening of April 26th. The next morning, Lakpa Tamang put on Mingma's harness and started climbing. Lakpa had never been above 6,400 meters. He had never guided a client. He didn't know what a Sarak was. He didn't have the training to assess ice stability. He didn't even have proper boots. He was wearing a borrowed pair 2 sizes too large. And Rajesh knew all of this. He knew Lakpa's experience. He knew Lakpa's limitations. He sent him anyway. Because Philip Adler was paying $85,000. Because Summit Horizon's Summit success rate was their primary marketing tool. Because losing another client to a Mingma abort would damage the company's reputation. Because money mattered more than Lakpa Tamang's life. But here's the part that makes this worse. Here's the part that no one ever reported. There was a 4th option. Rajesh could have sent one of 2 other experienced Sherpas who were at base camp. Both had Annapurna experience. Both were available. Both were willing to assess the Sarak band and make their own recommendation. Rajesh didn't send either of them. He sent Lakpa, the cheapest option. The one who would say yes to anything. The one who didn't know enough to disagree. Rajesh Kandel chose the most unqualified person available, not because he didn't have alternatives, because the alternatives might have agreed with Mingma. April 27th. Morning. Philip and Lakpa left Camp 1 at 5:30 a.m., heading for Camp 2. Philip was in a good mood. He recorded a short video on his GoPro. He said, "New guide. Fresh energy. Let's get this done." He was smiling. Lakpa was behind him, carrying a load that was too heavy for his experience level. He was breathing hard. He didn't say anything. They reached Camp 2 at 2 p.m. Philip radioed base camp and reported good progress. He said conditions looked stable. He said Lakpa was doing great. Lakpa was sitting in the tent behind him, hands shaking from exhaustion. He hadn't said a word in 3 hours. The next morning they would push for Camp 3. Through the Sarak band. The one Mingma had warned about. The one that was cracking. The one that would collapse in less than 24 hours. At base camp, Mingma heard the radio call. He walked to the edge of camp and looked up at the mountain. He could see the Sarak band from where he stood. Even from that distance, he could see the fracture lines in the ice. He later said that looking up at that mountain on the evening of April 27th was the worst moment of his life. Because he knew exactly what was going to happen. And there was nothing he could do about it. Or so he thought. Chapter 4, The Collapse, April 28, 2017. 4:15 a.m. Philip Adler woke up in his tent at Camp 2. He checked his watch. He checked his oxygen levels. He drank half a liter of water. He unzipped the tent and looked outside. The sky was clear. No wind. Perfect conditions. He woke Lakpa. Lakpa hadn't slept. He'd been lying in his sleeping bag with his eyes open for 6 hours. His boots, the borrowed ones, 2 sizes too large, had given him blisters on both heels. He'd wrapped them in medical tape from the first aid kit. The tape was already peeling off. He didn't tell Philip about the blisters. He didn't tell Philip about anything. Lakpa's job, as he understood it, was to carry gear, set the pace, and get Philip to Camp 3. Nobody had told him to assess conditions. Nobody had told him to make safety calls. He was a kitchen helper wearing a dead man's harness. He did what he was told. They left Camp 2 at 5:20 a.m. The route from Camp 2 to Camp 3 on Annapurna's north face passes through a Sarak band between 300 and 600 meters. Saraks are massive towers and blocks of glacial ice. They form naturally as glaciers move over uneven terrain. They can be the size of buildings. They are inherently unstable. They collapse without warning. You cannot predict when a Sarak will fall. You can only assess the probability. Mingma had assessed the probability as high. He was right. At 5:20 a.m., when Philip and Lakpa started climbing, the Sarak band was still standing. It had been cracking for days. Small chunks of ice had been falling intermittently. The fracture lines Mingma had identified were widening, but the main structures were intact. The Saraks looked solid. They looked safe. That's the thing about Saraks. They always look safe right until the moment they're not. Philip was moving well. His GoPro was rolling. The footage shows him climbing steadily, using fixed ropes where they were available. He was talking to the camera occasionally. At 5:47 a.m. he said, "Camp 3 by lunch, feeling strong." At 6:12 a.m. he pointed the camera at the ice formations above him and said, "Beautiful, absolutely beautiful." He was looking at the structures that would kill him. He thought they were scenery. Lakpa was 15 meters behind Philip. He was struggling. The borrowed boots were destroying his feet. The heavy pack was pulling him off balance. At one point, the footage shows Lakpa stopping to catch his breath. His face is visible for 3 seconds. He looks terrified. Not tired, terrified. He's looking up at the Saraks with an expression that suggests he understands something is wrong but doesn't have the vocabulary or the authority to say so. At 6:38 a.m., Philip reached an altitude of approximately 450 meters. He was in the middle of the Sarak band. Directly above him and slightly to the left was a Sarak formation, roughly the size of a 3-story building. It weighed approximately 40 tons. Its base had been fracturing for 6 days. The fracture was now nearly complete. The Sarak was connected to the glacier by a strip of ice less than 2 meters wide. A gentle push would have toppled it. Gravity was about to provide that push. 6:41 a.m. The Sarak shifted. Not dramatically. A small movement. A settling. Ice crystals fell from the top. Philip didn't notice. He was focused on the next section of fixed rope 10 meters above him. Lakpa didn't notice. He was focused on not falling. 6:42 a.m. The connecting strip of ice fractured. The sound was like a gunshot. Philip heard it. His GoPro recorded it. He stopped climbing. He looked up. For 2 seconds, the camera shows the Sarak tilting. 2 seconds of footage that Philip's family has never watched. 2 seconds in which Philip Adler understood what was about to happen. He didn't scream. He said one word. No. The Sarak fell. 40 tons of ice dropped from a height of approximately 50 meters. It shattered on impact, sending blocks and debris cascading down the slope. The collapse triggered a secondary release. Ice and snow from adjacent formations broke free, creating a wall of frozen debris roughly 30 meters wide. It swept down the slope at approximately 80 kilometers per hour. Philip was hit first. The impact came from above and to his left. A block of ice estimated at 3 tons struck his left shoulder and chest. It drove him into the slope. His fixed rope snapped instantly. The force broke his ribs, collapsed his left lung, and fractured his spine in 2 places. He was pushed downward approximately 20 meters before the debris buried him. He was under 2 meters of compacted ice and snow. His right arm was pinned above his head. His left arm was crushed against his body. He could not move. He could not breathe. His chest cavity was compressed to the point where his lungs could not expand. Philip Adler was conscious for approximately 90 seconds after burial. The GoPro kept recording. The footage is black. Nothing visible under the ice. But the audio captured something. Breathing. Rapid, shallow, panicked breathing. Then slower. Then a sound that could be a word. Forensic audio analysts couldn't determine what it was. Then nothing. The breathing stopped at an estimated time of 6:44 a.m. Philip Adler was dead within 3 minutes of the Sarak collapse. He was 43 years old. Lakpa Tamang was hit 4 seconds after Philip. He was 15 meters below and to the right. The debris field caught him on its edge. He wasn't hit by a direct block. He was swept off his feet by the cascading snow and ice. He tumbled approximately 40 meters down the slope. His body came to rest at roughly 410 meters. His left leg was broken in 3 places. His right arm was dislocated. He was partially buried. His upper body was exposed, but his lower body was under debris. Lakpa was alive. He was alone on a mountainside at 410 meters, with a shattered leg, a dislocated arm, no radio, no way to move, and no one who knew where he was. At 6:45 a.m., 3 minutes after the collapse, the dust and debris settled. The mountain was silent. At Camp 2, 2 other climbers from a different expedition heard the collapse. They looked up and saw the dust cloud. They radioed base camp immediately. The message was, Major Sarak collapse above Camp 2 on the north face. Possible climbers in the area. At base camp, Ming Dorje was drinking tea. He heard the radio call. He put down his cup. He didn't say anything. He walked to the equipment tent, picked up his harness, and started putting it on. The base camp manager asked him what he was doing. Mingma said, "I'm going up." The base camp manager said that was against protocol. Mingma said, "They're dead or dying. I'm going up." 3 other Sherpas joined him. They left base camp at 7:15 a.m., 34 minutes after the collapse. They climbed fast. Mingma set a pace that pushed even the experienced Sherpas with him. They reached Camp 2 by 11 a.m. By then, they had more information from the 2 climbers who had witnessed the dust cloud. The collapse was in the Sarak band between 300 and 600 meters. The route was blocked by debris. Fixed ropes in the collapse zone were destroyed. Mingma didn't hesitate. He roped up and started climbing toward the collapse zone at 11:30 a.m. At 1:15 p.m., nearly 7 hours after the collapse, Mingma heard something. A voice. Weak. Coming from the debris field. He followed the sound. At 410 meters, he found Lakpa Tamang. Lakpa was conscious. Barely. His lips were blue. His broken leg was swollen to twice its normal size. He'd been lying in the snow for nearly 7 hours. Hypothermia was setting in. But he was alive. Lakpa looked at Mingma and said 2 words, "Sir, dead." Mingma asked where. Lakpa pointed upward. He said Philip was 20 meters higher. Buried. Lakpa had heard Philip's last breaths. He had heard the breathing stop. He had been lying 15 meters from a dead man for 7 hours, unable to move, unable to call for help, listening to the mountain creak around him, wondering if another Sarak would fall and finish what the first one started. Mingma made a decision. He could try to reach Philip's body, or he could save Lakpa's life. He couldn't do both. The debris field above was unstable. The remaining Saraks were fractured. Going higher meant risking another collapse. Mingma chose Lakpa. It took 4 hours to get Lakpa down to Camp 2. Mingma carried him on his back for portions of the descent. The other Sherpas took turns. Lakpa screamed with every movement. His broken leg was unsplinted. They didn't have the materials. They wrapped it in a sleeping pad and tied it with cord. It wasn't enough. Lakpa passed out from pain twice during the descent. They reached Camp 2 at 5:30 p.m. A helicopter was called but couldn't fly. Cloud cover had rolled in. Lakpa spent the night at Camp 2, with Mingma sitting beside him, monitoring his breathing, keeping him hydrated, keeping him warm. Mingma didn't sleep. At 6 a.m. on April 29th, 23 hours after the Sarak collapse, a Pakistani military helicopter reached Camp 2. Lakpa was loaded onto a stretcher and airlifted to a hospital in Pokhara. He would survive. His left leg would be amputated below the knee 3 weeks later due to complications from frostbite and compound fractures. He was 24 years old. Philip's body remained on the mountain. Mingma didn't go back down with the helicopter. He stayed at Camp 2. He wanted to recover Philip's body. He waited for 2 days. On May 1st, a brief weather window opened. Mingma and 2 other Sherpas climbed into the debris field. They found Philip at 450 meters. He was under approximately 2 meters of compacted ice. His right hand was above his head, gripping his trekking pole. His GoPro was still attached to his chest mount. The battery had died hours after he did. They dug Philip out over 4 hours. They wrapped his body in a tarp. They couldn't carry him down. He was frozen solid, and the descent through the damaged route was too technical for a body carry. They secured him to the slope and marked the location with flags. Philip's body would remain there until May 14th, when a specialized recovery team brought him down in an operation that cost $47,000, paid for by Caroline Adler. When Mingma returned to base camp with Philip's GoPro and personal effects, he sat down in the mess tent and cried. It was the first time anyone had seen him show emotion in 14 years of guiding. He cried for 20 minutes. Then he stopped, wiped his face, drank a cup of tea, and said to the base camp manager, "I told them. I told all of them." He had. Nobody listened. Chapter 5. The radio call, nobody answered. Here's something that was never reported in any news coverage of Philip Adler's death. Lakpa Tamang made a radio call. At 6:25 a.m. on April 28th, 16 minutes before the Sarak collapsed, Lakpa picked up his radio and tried to contact base camp. The radio log shows the transmission. It lasted approximately 45 seconds. Base camp did not respond. The transmission was logged as received no reply in Summit Horizon's communication records. Those records were subpoenaed during the lawsuit. What did Lakpa say in that 45-second call? According to the radio log transcript, partial and scratchy, Lakpa reported that he could hear cracking sounds from the ice above. He said he was scared. He said something that was transcribed as ice moving, or possibly ice moaning. He asked for instructions. He asked whether he and Philip should continue climbing or turn back. Nobody answered. The base camp radio operator that morning was a man named Bikram. He was employed by Summit Horizon. He later testified in the lawsuit deposition that he was away from the radio at 6:25 a.m. He said he was using the toilet. He said he returned to the radio at approximately 6:50 a.m., 8 minutes after the collapse. By then, the distress calls were already coming in from other teams. The lawyers asked Bikram why the radio was unattended. Base camp protocol requires 24-hour radio monitoring during active climbing operations. Bikram said he was the only operator on shift. He said he'd requested a second operator. Summit Horizon had denied the request to save costs. Here's what that means. 16 minutes before the Sarak collapsed, the person closest to the danger, the inexperienced, terrified 24-year-old kitchen helper who had been sent up the mountain against all reason, recognized that something was wrong. He heard the ice cracking. He was afraid. He asked for help. And the radio was unmanned because the expedition company was too cheap to hire a second operator. If Bikram had answered that call, if he had told Lakpa to turn around immediately, Lakpa and Philip would have had 16 minutes to descend. At their climbing speed, they could have descended approximately 150 meters. They would have been below the worst of the Sarak band. They might have been hit by debris. They might have been injured. But they almost certainly would have survived. Instead, silence. And then ice. Caroline Adler filed her lawsuit against Summit Horizon Expeditions in September 2017. The suit alleged negligence, wrongful death, and fraud. The fraud allegation was based on the email, the fabricated message from Don Bahadur that poisoned Philip against Mingma. Caroline's lawyers obtained the email during discovery. They traced its origin to a meeting between Rajesh Khandel and Dan Bahadur in Kathmandu on April 6. They found text messages between Rajesh and Dan discussing the email's content. The messages showed Rajesh dictating specific phrases he wanted included. He wanted Philip primed to distrust Mingma. The negligence allegation was based on three things. First, the replacement of a qualified Sherpa guide with an unqualified kitchen helper. Second, the failure to provide Lakpa with proper equipment, training, or briefing on the route's dangers. Third, the unmanned radio at the time of Lakpa's distress call. The wrongful death allegation was based on the argument that Rajesh knew the Sarak band was unstable. He had received the same satellite data Mingma had, and allowed Philip to climb through it anyway with an unqualified guide. Summit Horizon's defense was predictable. They argued that Philip was an experienced climber who made his own decisions. They argued that mountaineering is inherently dangerous, and all clients sign liability waivers. They argued that Lakpa was a, quote, voluntary participant who chose to accept the assignment. They argued that Sarak collapses are unpredictable natural events. The judge in the case, a Nepali magistrate named Pradeep Sharma, made a remarkable statement during preliminary hearings. He said, "A liability waiver does not absolve an operator of responsibility for creating the conditions that cause death. A client assumes the risk of the mountain. A client does not assume the risk of being deliberately deceived about the competence of their guide." The case was settled in February 2018. The terms were confidential, but sources close to the proceedings told climbing journalists that Summit Horizon paid approximately $1.2 million to Caroline Adler. Part of the settlement included a non-disclosure agreement. Caroline was prohibited from publicly discussing the details of the email, the radio failure, or Rajesh Khandel's direct involvement in Mingma's replacement. Caroline signed the NDA. She took the money. She used part of it to establish a scholarship fund in Philip's name for Sherpa families. The rest went into a trust for Oliver, Philip's son, who was 7 years old when his father died. But the settlement didn't answer the questions that mattered. Why didn't Rajesh face criminal charges? He didn't face criminal charges because Nepal's legal framework for mountaineering negligence was, and remains, almost non-existent. Expedition operators are regulated by the Department of Tourism, which issues permits and collects fees. The department has no investigative authority. It has no enforcement mechanism for safety violations. Operators who cause deaths through negligence face, at most, a suspension of their operating license. Summit Horizon's license was suspended for one climbing season. One season. Then, they were back. Why didn't the base camp radio operator face consequences? Bikram was fired by Summit Horizon after the lawsuit settlement. He was hired by another expedition operator 3 months later. He's still working as a radio operator in the Himalayas today. What happened to Dan Bahadur, the man who sent the email? Dan denied writing the email at Rajesh's direction until the text messages were produced during discovery. Then he changed his story. He said Rajesh had pressured him. He said he didn't think it would matter. He said he didn't think anyone would die. Dan was not named in the lawsuit. He was not charged with anything. He stopped working in the climbing industry in 2018 and moved to Qatar to work in construction logistics. He has never spoken publicly about the email. What about the official investigation? The Nepal Mountaineering Association conducted a review. Their report, released in August 2017, concluded that Philip Adler's death was caused by Sarak collapse, an unforeseeable natural hazard. The report made no mention of the fabricated email, no mention of Lakpa's qualifications, no mention of the unmanned radio, no mention of Mingma's warning being deliberately undermined. The report recommended improved weather monitoring protocols. That was it. Mingma Dorje read the report. He called it a lie written by people who profit from more lies. He was not interviewed for the investigation. The GoPro footage was returned to Caroline Adler with Philip's personal effects in June 2017. The footage contained approximately 4 hours of recordings from the expedition. The final recording, the one from the Sarak band on April 28th, runs for 18 minutes. The first 15 minutes show Philip climbing, talking to the camera, pointing at the scenery. The last 3 minutes are audio only. Black screen. The sound of breathing, then silence. Caroline has never watched the footage. She told a reporter in 2019, "I know what's on it. I don't need to hear my husband die. The GoPro is in a safe deposit box in Greenwich." She said she'll let Oliver decide what to do with it when he's old enough. Lakpa Tamang left the hospital in Pokhara in June 2017. His left leg had been amputated below the knee. He was fitted with a prosthetic through a charitable organization. He returned to Rasua district to live with his family. The $3,000 he was promised for replacing Mingma was never paid. Summit Horizon claimed Lakpa had not completed the assignment. He didn't have a contract. He had no legal recourse. In 2019, a climbing journalist named Mark Jenkins tracked Lakpa down in Rasua. Jenkins asked Lakpa about the day of the collapse. Lakpa said he remembered the cracking sound. He remembered trying to use the radio. He remembered nobody answering. He remembered the impact. He remembered lying in the snow with a broken leg, hearing Philip's breathing slow and stop. He remembered thinking he was going to die alone. He remembered Mingma's face when the rescue team found him. Jenkins asked Lakpa if he blamed Philip. Lakpa said no. He said Philip was kind to him. He said Philip gave him a chocolate bar at Camp 2 the night before. He said Philip treated him like a person, not a porter. He said the only person he blamed was the boss, Rajesh. Jenkins asked Lakpa if he would climb again. Lakpa lifted his prosthetic leg and said, "The mountain already answered that question." Nobody asked Lakpa the question that mattered most. The question that haunts this entire story. The question that no one involved has ever answered publicly. If someone had answered that radio call at 6:25 a.m., if someone had simply said, "Turn around," would Lakpa still have both legs? Would Philip still be alive? The answer is almost certainly yes, and that's the difference between a tragedy and a crime. Chapter 6. The man nobody talks about, Rajesh Kandel, is still running Summit Horizon expeditions. Let that settle for a moment. The man who orchestrated the email that poisoned Philip against Mingma. The man who replaced a veteran guide with a kitchen helper. The man whose company left the radio unmanned. The man whose cost-cutting and reputation protection directly caused 2 deaths and 1 amputation. He is still in business. He is still taking clients to 8,000-meter peaks. He is still advertising Summit's success rates on his website. As of 2024, Summit Horizon Expeditions has operated on Everest, Manaslu, and Annapurna since the one-season suspension ended in 2018. Their website makes no mention of Philip Adler, no mention of Lakpa Tamang, no mention of the 2017 Annapurna incident. The client testimonials on their website are all positive. The summit success rates are prominently displayed. The safety section mentions experienced Sherpa guides and 24-hour base camp communications. If you're subscribing to this channel to stay informed about which operators you can trust in the Himalayas, and you should because this isn't the last story like this will tell, then remember this name. Remember it because the system that allowed Rajesh to continue operating is the same system that will allow the next preventable death. Subscribe so you don't miss it when we cover it. But Rajesh isn't the man nobody talks about. Rajesh is the obvious villain. The man nobody talks about is Don Bahadur. Don sits in a strange moral space. He didn't make the decision to fire Mingma. He didn't send Lakpa up the mountain. He didn't leave the radio unmanned. All he did was send an email. 3 paragraphs of lies. It took him maybe 15 minutes to write. He was paid $470. And those 3 paragraphs created the conditions for everything that followed. Without Don's email, Philip would have trusted Mingma. When Mingma said aboard, Philip would have listened, just like he listened on Dhaulagiri in 2015. He would have delayed his summit push. The Sarak would have collapsed with no one underneath it. Philip would have either summited later or gone home alive. Either way, he'd be alive. Lakpa would still have both legs. Lakpa would still be a kitchen helper, still saving money, still dreaming of becoming a climbing Sherpa the right way. Don Bahadur's email was the first domino, and he has never been held accountable for it, not legally, not professionally, not publicly. Until now. This channel exists to tell the stories that the climbing industry doesn't want told. If you think that matters, if you think accountability matters, subscribe. Share this with someone who climbs. Share this with someone who's considering hiring an expedition operator in Nepal. because the information in this video might save their life. And that's not hyperbole. That's the literal truth. The system is broken. People are dying because of it. The only pressure that changes anything is public pressure. Your subscription, your comment, your share. That's pressure. Use it. Now, back to the investigation. Because there's another layer to this story that the settlement and the NDA were specifically designed to hide. The satellite data. Remember the thermal imaging that showed the Sarak band was becoming unstable? Mingma received it. Philip was told about it. But Rajesh dismissed it as inconclusive. Here's what the lawsuit discovery revealed about that data. Summit Horizon received the satellite report at 3:47 a.m. on April 26th, 2 days before the collapse. The report was sent by a Swiss weather service that provides forecasting for multiple Himalayan expedition operators. The report was clear. It was not ambiguous. It stated, significant thermal instability detected in Sarak band between 300 to 600 meters on Annapurna north face. High probability of major collapse within 3 to 7 days. Recommend all climbing activity through this zone cease immediately until conditions stabilize. The report was addressed to Rajesh Kundel personally. He opened it at 4:12 a.m. The email metadata confirmed this. He read it. And then, this is in the lawsuit documents, he forwarded it to his operations manager with a note that said, "Don't share this with clients. We'll lose the window. Don't share this with clients. We'll lose the window." That note was Exhibit 14 in the Caroline Adler lawsuit. It was the single most damaging piece of evidence. It proved that Rajesh didn't just dismiss the Sarak data as inconclusive. He actively suppressed it. He hid it from Philip. He hid it from Lakpa. He hid it from every client on his expedition. Because sharing it would have meant canceling the summit push. Canceling meant refunds. Refunds meant financial loss. Rajesh chose money over lives. Not in the abstract way that people accuse companies of doing. In the literal, documented, email-forwarded way. He read a report that said people would die. He hid it. People died. The settlement was designed to bury this. The NDA Caroline signed prevented her from discussing Exhibit 14 publicly. But the exhibit was entered into the court record during preliminary hearings before the settlement was reached. Court records in Nepal are technically public, but practically inaccessible. They're stored in physical files in district courts, not digitized, not searchable online. The climbing journalist Mark Jenkins obtained a copy through a source inside the court system. He published portions of it in a 2020 article for an outdoor magazine. The article received minimal attention. It was overshadowed by COVID-19 coverage. So here we are, telling you what the NDA was designed to prevent you from knowing. Because the truth doesn't belong to Summit Horizon Expeditions. It belongs to Philip Adler. It belongs to Lakpa Tamang. It belongs to Mingma Dorje. And it belongs to every climber who hires an expedition operator, trusting that the operator values their life more than their profit margin. There's one more controversy. The climbing community's response. After Philip's death, the online climbing community reacted exactly as you'd expect. Forums lit up with posts about arrogant rich climbers who ignore Sherpa wisdom. Philip was mocked, called a tourist, called a checkbook climber. His Instagram was flooded with comments saying he deserved what he got. Memes were made. His death became a cautionary tale told without nuance. Rich guy fires Sherpa. Rich guy dies. Nobody talked about the email. Nobody talked about Lakpa. Nobody talked about the radio. Nobody talked about Rajesh. Philip Adler was reduced to a punchline. The arrogant millionaire who got what was coming to him. And that narrative served everyone who was actually responsible. Because as long as people blamed Philip, nobody looked at the expedition operator who manufactured the distrust, hired the unqualified replacement, suppressed the safety data, and left the radio unmanned. Philip made mistakes. He fired Mingma. That was wrong. He should have listened. But Philip made that mistake because he was lied to. He was manipulated by someone he trusted. He was given false information designed to make him distrust the one person keeping him alive. And then, when he acted on that false information, exactly as Rajesh intended, everyone blamed Philip. That's not a tragedy. That's a setup. Mingma Dorje has said this publicly. In a 2021 interview with a Nepali newspaper, Mingma said, "Mr. Adler was not a bad man. He was a deceived man. The bad men are still in Kathmandu, still taking money, still sending people to die. If you want to support the Sherpa community, the people who actually risk their lives on these mountains, subscribe to this channel. Every video we make tells their side of the story, the side that expedition operators and climbing forums ignore. Your subscription tells us to keep making these. And believe me, we have more stories like this. Worse stories. Stories that will make you question the entire commercial climbing industry. Drop a comment below. Tell us what you think about Rajesh Kundel still operating. Tell us whether you think Philip deserved what happened. Tell us who you think is really responsible. We read every comment. And we use your questions and perspectives to shape future investigations. Now, the final chapter. What changed? What didn't? And where they all are now. Chapter 7. The harness. Mingma Dorje still has the harness. The one Lakpa wore. The one that was originally Mingma's. Summit Horizon gave it to Lakpa because they didn't want to issue new equipment for a kitchen helper. Mingma's name is still written on the inside of the waist belt in black marker. After Lakpa was rescued, the harness was removed at Camp 2 and left behind. Mingma collected it. He brought it home to Namche Bazaar. It hangs on a nail in his equipment room. He has never used it again. He has never cleaned it. It still has Lakpa's blood on the leg loops from where the broken bone tore through the skin. When a journalist asked Mingma why he kept it, he said, "So I remember what happens when the right person is not on the mountain." That harness represents everything about this story. A qualified man's equipment, handed to an unqualified man, stained with the consequences. So what changed after Philip Adler and Lakpa Tamang died on Annapurna in April 2017? Some things changed. The Swiss Weather Service that provided the Sarak stability report changed its distribution protocol. Before 2017, reports were sent only to expedition operators who decided whether to share them with clients. After 2017, the service began offering direct subscriptions to individual climbers. For $200 per expedition, a climber could receive the same data their operator received. No middleman, no filtering, no suppression. By 2023, approximately 40% of climbers on 8,000-meter peaks in Nepal had individual weather subscriptions. That's a direct result of Philip Adler's death. That change has almost certainly saved lives. The Nepal Mountaineering Association updated its guidelines for Sherpa guide qualifications. After 2017, guides assigned to clients above 7,000 meters were required to have documented experience at that altitude. Kitchen staff and porters could no longer be reassigned as climbing guides without training certification. The guideline was voluntary, not enforceable. But it gave expedition operators a standard. Some followed it, some didn't. Several expedition operators, not Summit Horizon but their competitors, implemented mandatory dual radio coverage at base camp. 24-hour monitoring with a minimum of 2 operators on overlapping shifts. No gaps, no excuses. This was directly cited as a response to the unmanned radio during Lakpa's distress call. If you're researching expedition operators right now, and if you've watched this far, you probably should be asked about their radio protocols. Ask how many operators they have on shift. Ask what happens if someone needs help at 6 a.m. If they can't answer clearly, find another company. Subscribe to this channel and check our community tab. We post operator reviews and safety assessments that could save your life. That's not a sales pitch. That's genuine advice from people who research these deaths for a living. Now, what didn't change? The fundamental economics of commercial climbing didn't change. Expedition operators still compete on summit success rates. Higher success rates mean more clients. More clients mean more money. This creates an incentive to push through marginal conditions rather than abort. Every aborted expedition is a financial loss. Every lost client is a negative review. Every Sherpa who says no is a threat to revenue. The system that pressured Rajesh to suppress the weather data and replace Mingma with Lakpa is the same system operating today. The incentives haven't changed. The pressure hasn't changed. The power imbalance between wealthy clients and poorly paid Sherpas hasn't changed. Sherpas are still paid a fraction of what clients spend. Philip paid $85,000 for his Annapurna expedition. Mingma's fee for the entire season was approximately $6,000. Lakpa was offered $3,000 to risk his life, money he never received. The median annual income in Solukhumbu district is approximately $1,500. Sherpas take life-threatening risks because the alternative is poverty. They accept dangerous assignments because refusing means losing work. They stay silent about operator negligence because speaking out means being blacklisted. Mingma spoke out. Mingma was labeled difficult. That label followed him. After the Annapurna incident, 2 expedition operators refused to hire him. Not because he was wrong about the Saraks, because he was loud about being right. If you think this system needs to change, and I hope you do, share this video, not for our channel's benefit. For the next Lakpa Tamang, the next kitchen helper who gets handed a harness he's not qualified to wear and pointed at a mountain that will kill him. The only thing that changes this industry is attention. Your share is attention. Use it. Now. Where are they now? All of them. Mingma Dorje is 54 years old. He still works as a high-altitude guide. But he no longer accepts assignments on Annapurna. He guides on Everest and Amadablam. He has turned down 3 Annapurna offers since 2017. He told the Nepali Times in 2023, "I see Philip's face every time I look at that mountain. I cannot go back." Mingma's daughters are both in secondary school. He is paying for their education with guiding income. He wants them to go to university. He wants them to have choices he never had. He is still married to Dawa. They live in Namche Bazaar. The harness still hangs on the nail. Lakpa Tamang is 31 years old. He lives in Rasua district with his parents and 3 siblings. His left leg was amputated below the knee. He walks with a prosthetic provided by a charitable organization. He cannot work as a porter. He cannot work on mountains. He farms a small plot of land with his father. The $3,000 Summit Horizon promised him was never paid. He has no savings. He has no pension. He has no compensation from the company that sent him to die. In 2022, a GoFundMe campaign organized by Mark Jenkins raised $11,400 for Lakpa's family. It was the most money Lakpa had ever seen. He used it to repair his family's house and buy a water buffalo. Lakpa does not blame Philip. He has said this repeatedly. He blames the boss. He blames the system. He blames the fact that a 24-year-old kitchen helper was worth less than a weather report that someone decided not to share. Caroline Adler lives in Greenwich, Connecticut. Oliver, Philip's son, is now 14. Caroline has not remarried. She runs the Philip Adler Memorial Scholarship, which provides educational funding for children of Sherpa families who have lost a parent on 8,000-meter peaks. The scholarship has funded 17 students since its inception. Caroline does not speak publicly about Philip's death. The NDA prevents her from discussing the details. But she told a friend, who told a journalist, who published it with her permission, that what hurts most is not that Philip died. What hurts most is that people think he deserved it. He didn't deserve it. Philip Adler was manipulated by people he trusted into making a decision that killed him. He was arrogant, yes. He was stubborn, yes. He was wrong to fire Mingma. But he was wrong because he was lied to. And the people who lied to him faced no meaningful consequences. Rajesh Kandal is 57 years old. He is the CEO of Summit Horizon Expeditions. His company operated on 3 8,000-meter peaks in 2023. His website advertises a 78% summit success rate. He has never publicly commented on Philip Adler's death. He has never publicly apologized to Lakpa Tamang. He has never publicly acknowledged the email, the suppressed weather data, or the unmanned radio. He paid $1.2 million in settlement, a fraction of his annual revenue, and moved on. He is, by every measurable standard, fine. Don Bahadur is in Qatar. He works in construction logistics. He has no social media presence. He does not respond to journalist inquiries. The $470 he was paid to send the email that started everything, is less than he earns in a single day at his current job. He has never contacted the Adler family. He has never contacted Lakpa. He has never contacted Mingma. He wrote 3 paragraphs that killed 2 people, and he disappeared. Bikram, the radio operator, works for a different expedition company on Everest. He has never spoken publicly about the morning of April 28, 2017. The morning he was away from the radio when Lakpa called for help. The morning his absence cost a man his leg and another man his life. Philip Adler's body was recovered on May 14, 2017. He was cremated in Kathmandu. His ashes were returned to Caroline. She scattered them in Long Island Sound, near their home. Oliver watched. He was 7. Caroline said Oliver asked one question. Did Daddy see the top? Caroline said yes. She lied. Philip never got close. The GoPro is in a safe deposit box. 18 minutes of footage. 15 minutes of climbing. 3 minutes of dying. Oliver will decide what to do with it when he's 18. He turns 18 in 2028. In 4 years, a young man will open a safe deposit box and decide whether to listen to his father's last breath. Nobody should have to make that choice. Philip shouldn't have died. Lakpa shouldn't have lost his leg. Mingma shouldn't have had to carry the guilt of being right. If this story made you feel something, anger, sadness, frustration, anything, then do something with it. Subscribe to this channel. We're covering the 2008 K2 disaster next. 11 climbers dead in 18 hours. And the investigation revealed failures even darker than these. You need to hear that story. Comment below with who you think is most responsible for Philip's death. Was it Philip, Rajesh, Don, the system itself? We want to know what you think, because your perspective shapes how we tell these stories. Share this video with one person. Just one. Someone who climbs. Someone who's considering an expedition. Someone who thinks the climbing industry regulates itself. It doesn't. This video is proof. And if you're still here, if you've watched this far, thank you. Seriously. Most people don't make it to the end of a 100-minute video. You did. That means you care about the truth. That means you care about the people behind the headlines. Philip, Mingma, Lakpa, Caroline, Oliver, even Dan, even Rajesh. These aren't characters in a story. They're people whose lives were destroyed by a system that values summits over safety and money over lives. One final thing. In Mingma's equipment room in Namche Bazaar, next to the blood-stained harness, there's a photograph. It shows Mingma and Philip sitting at base camp eating dal bhat, smiling. It was taken on April 23, 2017, 5 days before Philip died. 3 days before the email poisoned everything. In the photo, they look like friends. They look like two men who trust each other with their lives. Mingma keeps the photo next to the harness. When asked why, he gives the same answer every time. So I remember what was possible. Before the lies. Philip Adler wanted to summit Annapurna to prove that preparation could conquer randomness. Instead, he proved the opposite. No amount of preparation protects you from the people you trust. The mountain didn't kill Philip Adler. People killed Philip Adler. The mountain just provided the setting. Lakpa Tamang wanted to become a climbing Sherpa. He wanted a better life for his family. Instead, he lost his leg, lost his future, and gained a memory he will never escape. The mountain didn't take Lakpa's leg. A decision made in a Kathmandu office took his leg. The mountain was just the place where the bill came due. Mingma Dorje was right about everything. The Saraks. The danger. The timing. He was right, and it didn't matter. Because being right only matters if the people with power are listening. And they weren't. They never are. The harness still hangs on the nail, Mingma's name on the inside, Lakpa's blood on the outside. It tells the whole story if you know how to read it. One qualified man's equipment, given to an unqualified man, by people who knew the difference and didn't care. That's the story of Annapurna, April 2017. That's the story of Philip Adler, Lakpa Tamang, and Mingma Dorje. That's the story of an email, a radio call, and 40 tons of ice. And somewhere right now, on an 8,000-meter peak in Nepal, a kitchen helper is being handed a harness. A weather report is being suppressed. A Sherpa is being ignored. And a client is trusting people who don't deserve that trust. Nothing has changed. Not really. Not enough. But maybe, if enough people watch this, share this, talk about this, maybe next time someone answers the radio.